Working Cows Podcast, episode 256. This episode is brought to you by Mystic Lubricants. For a look at their full range of top quality products, visit mysticlubes.com.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, powered by the Global Ag Network, and this episode is brought to you by Mystic Lubricants.
Since 1922, Mystic Lubricants has been providing superior performance and protection for farmers who demand the most out of their equipment. Today, Mystic continues to develop products in real-world conditions that are specially formulated to meet the unique demands of your specialized machines. They provide advanced protection for engine longevity and are the choice of people who make a living working the land. Learn more about Mystic products at mysticlubes.com. That's MYSTIK lubes.com.
Very excited to be joined today by Hugh Aljoe. Hugh is, of course, involved with and a director for the Noble Research Institute, and they have recently released a new series on YouTube called Regenerating the Ranch, and they've been going through a process of moving more towards a regenerative model of ranching on their properties, and we're going to talk to him about those principles and kind of the path that they've been following and what they've been working through and the challenges that they have met and some of the ways that they've introduced new species in order to match the resource base to the species that they've got there. So looking forward to this conversation with Hugh. Of course, it's an honor to have him back. So Hugh, thanks for joining me again on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome back.
You bet, Clay. I was glad to be here. Glad to be a part of the program again. I just enjoy listening to your episodes, and you always have some good guests, and it's always worth my time to listen in.
Appreciate that very much. You are, of course, part of the Noble Research Institute there, based in Oklahoma. What part of Oklahoma are you guys in? Kind of central, or are you closer to the east?
Yes, sir. We're in the south central Oklahoma. In fact, the ranches that we operate, three of them are right there next to the Red River almost. So two of them are on the Red River. We're in central Oklahoma, about 30 miles north of the Red River is where our campus is at, here at Ardmore, Oklahoma.
Nice. Nice country. I've been through that part of the world before. It's definitely different than Western South Dakota, so I like that. But you have recently launched a new series. Is this going to be a once a week series on the YouTube channel for the Regenerating the Ranch series, or what's the frequency of that series?
Clay, that'd be a really good question to ask, and I should already know that. I think they're coming out about once every other week. Okay. We've got a little bit of material, but you'd like to have a little bit of a teaser coming out and then have something else come out. But the intent is to let it run for about 2 weeks, and then there'll be another episode. But the first episode's out, and thank goodness for the videographer. It made a lot of us look good that don't normally look that good.
Yeah, it's always good to have an artist in the building.
It really is. Some creative geniuses. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I have gotten a chance to watch the first one. It is out as of this recording, and I believe as of the release of this episode, the second one will be out by then. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/256. workingcows.net/256 will be the show notes page for today, and you can go there and find a link to probably the embedded video there for the Regenerating the Ranch series. And I guess before we dive into the series a little bit, and you talked a little bit in our previous episode, episode 136, you talked a little bit about the history of the Noble Research Institute, but could you tell me a little bit about how these specific ranches came to be under the management of the Noble Research Institute?
Yes, sir. here at Noble, we've got about 14,000 acres worth of ranches, and they're different scales. A couple of them are relatively small, and then several of them are relatively large. The first ones that we took ownership on would have been probably in the mid to late 70s, where we had the opportunity to purchase a land that we were actually doing some work on itself. So we had at least had opportunity to purchase it, so we purchased it, and so that all overnight we were almost at 1,000 acres, and then over a period of time where our headquarters is, that we had a little land there that we were doing work. We were able to add a couple other properties over time. Where one was down along the Red River. We had a bunch of pecan trees, and one of the oldest orchards in the state. And we picked it up. That was about another 3,000 acres, and mostly introduced pasture. Not long after that, I had another property close to Ardmore that came up for sale, and we purchased it. So we really had the opportunity to add acres over time to where today we've got about 14,000 acres, of which the two largest places came from one opportunity where we had a generous donor actually donated a large portion of his property at his death, that we've actually turned that into part of our operations. Most of that's native pasture, native range. Gave us a unique opportunity to apply our practices on it. And one of those places we were operating back right after his death, because we leased it till it came out of probate. So it's a combination between introduced pastures as well as a little bit of cropland that we use strictly for forages. We've got native pasture, and then there's some of those properties that we have a few pecan trees. In our part of the world, silva pasture, where you're grazing and raising pecans, is pretty common. So we're fortunate to be in an area that is pretty diverse, but that in itself represents challenges.
And the grazing with the pecan trees, is that with cattle, or what class of livestock? Yes,
sir. We're primarily with cattle. We've been a cattle. Our focus has been cattle production since we started operating these different ranches. But just in the last 2 years, we've added a multi-species to our livestock enterprises. We've got a sheep enterprise. It's pretty small. We wanted to make sure that we learned how to manage sheep before we begin to scale it up. But the results have been pretty fantastic. After the first lamb crop, we were able to pay the ewes off halfway. You just don't get that opportunity with cattle, to in one crop be able to pay your ewes or your females off and halfway off. And then we've come in and we bought goats. We've got a lot of brush on our native range areas in particular, and there's an opportunity there that we've always heard. And back in my days of taking range science back in college, where you can run a cow, for every cow that you run, you can run a sheep or a goat and never impact your stocking rate. You don't have to adjust, of course, your animal units. So we're testing that and see how that goes. So far, 100%. You can at least do that. And when you've got the surplus of either forbs or browse, you probably run more. It's just a matter of how do you strike that balance. But right now, they look like they're going to be a lot more profitable in the short term than probably our cattle operations.
Sure. Yeah. And I don't know if this is necessarily, the case across the board, but I know for us, for over the last 3 years, probably the sheep prices have been incredible. And I think somebody one time attributed that to the big freeze that you guys had down there, or that Texas for sure had, and that was right during lambing season. And that I think some of that maybe production is getting back in the swing of things. Some of those herds are coming back, and maybe that's starting to affect these sheep prices a little bit. But it's been a pretty fun season, like you said, to be in the sheep business. So you were talking about introducing the sheep and the goats, and the fact that you had brush and forbs and those kinds of things in those areas is kind of what drew you to the sheep and the goats. And that kind of goes to the point of this first video that you guys have released, and that is context, that the context of the land that you're managing really should help you make some of the decisions. What is the context? So can you define the term as you guys are using it as far as context is concerned?
As we define context, is being able to look at your resources and understand not only environment, but better understand the history of management that's taking place on the operation that you're trying to manage. And it really gives us a better insight if we even go further back into pre-civilization. What, in the historic record, what did these lands actually look like? And it's not that we're ever going to go back to the, pre-civilization state, but the productivity on those lands based off of what the early explorers described is tremendous compared to what we have today. And I think just understanding how did we get to where we are, what are we trying to manage, what are the changes that are out there? And as we begin to make a change, we have to understand that there is going to be consequences of those management practices that we're going to implement. So can we use those management practices to drive the direction based off a better understanding of what the limitations or opportunities that the resources avail us to? We can do a better job of managing that.
Yeah. And so were there things that showed you or told you, the land told you, said, hey, this land is ripe for a sheep or a goat in a way that the cow isn't maximizing the resources that are available here? Was there some indicators there that drew you to the sheep and the goats?
Yes, sir. We'll start with we started with sheep just because we felt like they would be a little easier to manage. And we can tell you they are. They are much easier to manage than the goats are. The thing with the sheep is we, on the coffee ranch in particular, it's about 2,500 acres right there next to the river, predominantly native grass, but it's got a little induced pasture. But we're not using any type of weed control or weed spray. You just had a lot of forbs out there. You go out there and cattle move out of a pasture, and you still had a lot of forbs left behind. Of course, there's some brush as well. And we thought there could be an opportunity. So we bought some hair sheep, brought those in, and come to find out, they can follow right in behind the cattle, use the forbs that the cattle aren't using, and they'll strip the things, the weeds or the forbs that the wildlife, as a wildlife guy, they'll say that they are. That the cattle would never, you'd have to really put a lot of high stock density in order to get the cattle to use them. The sheep take them naturally. So it's been really good. We've since moved them down to the Red River, and we're seeing the same thing. They're going into the cattle, top graze, the introduced pastures, and then the sheep come in behind and, taking things like our nettles, the bull nettles, the nightshade, the mare's tail, all these forbs that the cattle don't typically want to eat. The cattle love them, so it's really been a nice compliment. And then with the goats, same thing. When you've got a lot of native range and the ones that we've inherited, those areas were probably historically well overgrazed, and as a result, a lot of those savanna type rangelands have actually been encroached with woody species. So you've got a lot of not only forests, but you got a lot of browse that's in there that would, we could add goats in there and probably never noticed that they were there. And that's been the case. We've been able to utilize a lot of, these goats that we've had, and they've made a big impact on those areas, but it hadn't deterred from our cattle grazing at all.
Yeah, that's a good thing, or interesting. It's always good to hear those kinds of things. What have been, I guess, what have been the keys to success in the regard to managing the sheep and the goats? What would you say have been some of the keys to success there?
Well, the key with the sheep has just been, one, understanding what the sheep needed. Early on, we'll be the first to tell you, our mistakes as well. We were holding those ewes up because they were lambing, and we all know that if you leave a ewes in an area too long, they could really get wormy fast. Well, that's probably one of the things that we experienced it. We lost a ewe. At that point, we went in there and found out through fecal analysis that they were loaded. We treated them, even though we don't really want to treat any of them, but we hadn't had to treat anything since, because then we understood, you got to move them about once, every 3 to 5 days. And so that's what we've been trying to do. So keeping them in fresh pasture, planning ahead of time that if they're lambing, have an area where they don't have to go very far. As you begin to make those moves, they can go back where they're at, but always have something fresh in front of them. That's made a big, big difference.
Yep. And what are you using to control the sheep and the goats?
Well, with the sheep, we're actually, we started them with a 2-wire electric temporary fence. Now we're using 1 wire at about 6 inches off the ground. Now, in some of the pastures, you've got to mow a strip in there, or if you're behind the cattle, you got to make sure that they've knocked it down pretty good because the grass gets taller than that here. It's been interesting, but that's what we typically have to do. Just keep that one fence in front of them. They do really well. And then we have water that we bring to them. We've got a water tank that's on a trailer that we can move water to wherever they are. So they're never without fresh water. So that keeps them close. And then the other thing, we're using dogs, guardian dogs to as protectors. And we haven't lost a sheep or lamb that we know of to a predator so far.
Yeah. How long has Noble been managing? I suppose all of these ranches are different periods of time that they've been managing them. So it kind of gives you an opportunity. And again, it's a research ranch. It gives you an opportunity to see the speed at which changes happen. And could you talk a little bit about that and how
Yes, sir.
how you've been able to observe that?
Okay. Well, we've just made the change to regenerative, what we call regenerative ranching, and I'll define what regenerative is to us. Is it's all about soil health on grazing lands in particular is what our interest here at Noble is, and profitability. And people can get caught up in the name regenerative and have different reactions from extremely positive to extremely negative, all because it's a label. But we're not here to label anyone. We don't want to put anyone into a label. Well, all we're wanting to do is try to rebuild the soil. And if you understood the mission of our founder, it was to rebuild soil and rebuild, regenerate. If you look at it, the words that he used out there, regenerate's the right word for us. But we are applying it to grazing lands, so regenerative ranching. So we're improving the soil health of our grazing lands as well as the profitability. So we've only been applying the regenerative ranching to all of our ranches here for the last 2 years. So it's been a short-term change. Now we go back to the coffee ranch. Years ago, we had it under holistic management from 88 to almost 2000. And we saw significant changes during that period of time, which holistic management would be a form of regenerative ranching in our minds. You're managing with nature as opposed to trying to supply a lot of inputs. Not to say that some inputs aren't going to be needed or required or you should use them, but in that context, on that ranch itself, we saw a threefold increase in forage production in a matter of 10, 11 years. So is that likely to occur everywhere? Well, it depends on how degraded you are and what the upward potential was. At Coffee Ranch, we were in low to fair range condition. We moved it to good. And at that point, you can make a significant difference on those lands. So we're hoping to see the same type of changes on all our properties. But part of the challenge we have is some of those lands are introduced pasture. What do you do with Bermuda grass? And here in the South, Bermuda grass is pretty common, and it was developed for fertilizer. It was developed with the application of fertilizer. So how do you pull that out without wrecking the entire system? So far, we've pulled it out for the last 2 years. We've been fine, other than the drought. We've been able to manage our grazing such that we're moving the livestock daily, or sometimes multiple times a day when early in the growing season, and sometimes trying to manage the grazing itself. And we found that if we do that, we probably can be able to withstand any type of withdrawal of the fertilizer because I know what the stocking rate is, or how much of that stocking rate is based on fertilizer on those ranches, because I was the one that was doing it. So, it's half. And it's not without challenges. It's not going to look the same. It's going to look a lot uglier than what a lot of people would expect it to be. But one of our communications people here at Noble was saying, we ought to make a little shirt out there that says we love ugly pastures. It's something that you kind of have to get used to, knowing that it's going to look quite a bit different. But if you have the mixed species and you're using the grazing management, you actually are cutting out a lot of the expenses, a lot of the cost, And maybe your revenue may not be quite what it was before, but your margins are significantly better.
Yep. And so you said that you are have made this shift over the past couple of years. But you were talking about the Bermuda grass, and you said that half of the stocking rate was based on the fertilizer that you were putting into it.
Yes,
is that right?
Yep.
So now, I mean, some of those nutrients are being replaced by the cattle cycling those nutrients for you, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and that's the key is when you begin to make that transition, are you really ready to use the livestock to be your tool? And what we've done, and it was a cognitive decision, and it takes a little bit of planning, is we're moving those, the cattle herds. We put all the cattle into a herd to the extent that we can. Now, if we've got growing cattle and we've got winter pasture, we're going to cover crops. We're going to graze those separately, but by and large, we've got one large herd of cows. What they do is when they come in there, they're moved on a daily basis, and you're making sure that they graze about, for us, we want to graze it down to about 6 inches. We really don't want to take it all the way down. But within that, they're going to be applying all the fertilizer, because 97% of what they eat is going to come out the backside one way or the other. So if you can have high quality nutrients going in, high quality nutrients are coming out the other end of it. If you've got active biology and they're incorporating into the soil, you get a little bit of moisture, which we haven't had a whole lot of it, but if you get it, by golly, all it does is get right back to work into the system. So it builds the opportunity for the nutrients to become readily available to be circulated right back into the plants, to the animals again. But it takes, you got to be able to do that regularly. And not everyone can do that, but that's what we've been able to successfully do.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I always enjoy what Steve Kenyon says is, if we were making a cow, we would make her 100% efficient. But, God designed that cow to be whatever percent efficient or inefficient, however you want to manage it, where the majority of what she's taken in is coming out the back end. And so there's benefits there. And so, I think that's something, just one of those changes of perspective that helps us start to think a little bit differently about our management and the impact that it's having on the world around us. What would you say have been some of the pitfalls of the shift to regenerating the ranch? As you said, you've switched the whole system over, where it was, if I understood you right, just the coffee ranch was under holistic management before, but now all of these properties are under this regenerative style of management. What would you say have been some of the pitfalls? I mean, I think we've talked about removing the fertilizer, but some of the things that you guys have experienced, or I don't know if pitfalls is even the right word, but just the ways that it's been like, oh, this is a consequence of managing this way.
Well, I think the first obstacle that most people have, and we did too, is understanding or envisioning that what's possible. You when you're used to, let's say on those introduced pastures, you're used to putting out the fertilizer, putting out the weed spray, coming in behind there and baling up the hay that was in excess. You've got a mindset change that's got to occur first. So, when you go in and you tell the people that are going to be managing that, says, I don't want you fertilizing. I don't want you weed spraying. I don't want, we're not going to be baling hay. In fact, we're going to sell the equipment. The first response is, do I even have a job? And then you have to help them understand, but their job is to observe the land and observe the livestock. And what I want them to do, and what we instructed, is I want you, going out there, putting up the temporary fences, watching the cattle, knowing when they're grazing, knowing what they're grazing. How does it shift as you increase stock densities, or as you move to a new area, or as it goes, from the morning to the afternoon? What's happening. Now I want you to, you want them to observe gut feel and their satisfaction. That's one of the things that they came back and said, the cattle seem to be more satisfied, content than they've ever before through this new management. But it's getting past the process of, I've got a list of tasks that I've got to do every day, and then actually begin to manage the responses based on your observations of the livestock in the land. So that was the biggest change was just trying to get past that first step. And then what we found out is you're going to make mistakes. You want to if you're going to make a mistake, you want to make them as inexpensively as possible. But then you've got to adapt and learn. And what they've learned really quick is that their paddock size is going to vary from week to week, year to year. You got to be able to estimate what the cattle needs, especially if you're going to be putting them in there on a daily basis. You want them to be full, and you don't want to take too much. So you're beginning to adjust your management based on what you're seeing. And then you've got to be able to plan. Typically, if you're not in a very intensive grazing schedule, you tend to know kind of what you're going to do. But as you begin to plan for those next moves, knowing that at some point in time you've got to have cattle near the facilities to process the calves, or you've got to get them ready to wean, or you've got to be in different areas, you just realize there's a lot more planning that's going to have to take place in order to to accomplish the goals that you want. So those are the big challenges that we face with just the mindset of things are going to look different, and then that my job tasks are also going to be considerably different.
Yeah. So observing the land, observing the livestock, and again, I think that feed budgeting piece that you talked about is so critically important. Just being able to see out there and say, this is what they need. This is what I've got out there. This is how long we can stay here. And then it becomes truly adaptive at that point, rather than just, a recipe every day is the same and all those things. So talk about the importance of being able to adapt as far as the management is concerned.
Being adaptive is extremely important, especially if you're trying to improve soil health and being regenerative. We've got to acknowledge the fact that every day is different. Every season's going to be different. And we've got to, we don't want to continually do what we've always done, and you're going to continue to get what you've always gotten. You've got to acknowledge back to the context. If we're in a growing season and we're actively growing, we have the opportunity to take the best of the forage and then lay everything else down. Put it back down to the soil, because that part of that plant that is not as digestible to the livestock, and certainly less palatable, is probably exactly what those organisms at the soil surface and below the surface actually can utilize best. But it's only utilized if it's laying down. So that's what part of the objective that we're trying to do, at least in our environment. So being adaptive, knowing that this is the opportunity to do it in good moisture conditions, and then as it begins to dry, dry out and soils or holding less moisture, then you've got to be able to adapt too. Now, it's not growing as fast. I may need to give them more acres in order to be able to consume and get their gut fill that they need and maintain the residual that I'm looking for. So it's a constant process, depending on the forages that you have, the soil types that you've got, the type of livestock that you're actually trying to graze. If you got a set of heifers, you're going to graze them a whole lot different than you're going to do the cows themselves. Then when we begin to look at times like we are right now, when we are in drought conditions and we're looking at trying to be as efficient as possible, you're still trying to maintain ample residual. But now, instead of laying everything down, I'm trying to make good use of what I've got. So it's a whole different grazing methodology that we're trying to apply at this point than we were back in the growing season. And then when you get into the wintertime, you're probably very much in the same mode. If you've got surplus forage, you can treat it a whole lot differently than if you're really in short supply, where every bite counts and efficiency matters, but you still have to maintain good cover on the soil at all times.
And you mentioned a couple of times the drought that you guys have been experiencing over the last couple of years. What has been your experience, or I don't know, what has been the duration of this drought, I guess I should ask first, and then what has been some of your experience with given this new style of management?
Well, the drought started for us, last year, and we saw it coming. But we, even though we were below on the annual rainfall, we had some timely rains through most of the growing season. And then we got into the last good rain was in July, and then since then, we've had, well, at least on our ranches, we've had 1 month that was at average, and that was this past May. Everything else has been below. And so if you look at our, at a 365-day rainfall total, we are just a little over half of what we should have received at this point in time. So some of the challenges that we've had is that even though it's been timely, we just haven't had the growth. We just don't get without the rainfall, you don't get the forage growth that you anticipate. And as a result, if we hadn't have been as using the single day high stock density type grazing, we'd have been out of grass like everybody else is. So now we're monitoring our reserve herd days on all our operations. We're monitoring it about every 2 weeks just to see where we're at. The places that catches a little rain here, we may get a little extra growth, but we're going to go through here probably we're already starting to early wean some of our herds. As soon as we get a preg check, we'll end up some destocking. Of course, everything that's open, and then we'll make some really tough decisions because we know that we don't have enough forage to get through the winter, and we're not going to buy the hay. We bought a little bit of hay to go for 30 days. That's not a lot, but cost effectively, that's about all that a cow-calf can afford for you to at least in our minds, what we want to still call it within our equation of being profitable. About 30 days of hay is about all we're going to afford to feed, and our hay is running us about $65 to $90 a hay, depending on what we're getting. So
yep, and so I don't really know exactly who listens to this on a weekly basis, and I know about how many people, but I don't know exactly where they're from, and so I'm going to just ask you to clarify some things for me as a guy from the north in a place where we're dominated by cool season grasses. Are you guys, and maybe somebody's going to be sitting there in South Carolina saying, finally, we're getting around to talking about, he's getting his perspective shifted a little bit. So are you guys dominated by warm season grasses there where you're at?
Yeah, so we're warm season perennials here in the Southern Great Plains. We're mostly native range is good. The grasses you'd like to see is little blue stem, big blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass. Those are our, what we call the big four that typically hope to manage our grazing around. And then on our introduced pastures, we're mostly Bermuda grass. You've got some old world blue stems or introduced blue stems that are out there in the mix, but it's predominantly Bermuda grass on our properties. And you got some places you may have a little bit of cool season that would be fescue that's volunteered in over in the east, but those are our perennial forages that we typically have to manage.
And so, do you guys count on rainfall more in the later into June than really May and April?
Yes.
For sure?
Well, yes. So most of our rainfall, I guess, is our big months are April's pretty good. May and June are your big months, and then we can actually have a little bit of a bimodal pattern. Some years, September, some years is pretty good. October is another pretty good month, and those are our big months. Now you can get some little. I guess for the most part, we're at a 35-inch rainfall here in southern Oklahoma. But if you go to eastern Oklahoma, it's 60 inches of rainfall, and in western Oklahoma, you get down into almost near the single digits.
Right.
12 inches and below. So
yep, yeah. I went to Wally Olson's marketing school in Claremore, yes. Oklahoma, and sat in with a guy who was from the Panhandle of Oklahoma, and we got to talk about the disparities between the two sides of the state.
It's amazing. You go through about I don't say I'd have to go back and look at the textbook, but I think there's like 12 or 13 forage zones when you go from east to west across the state.
Yeah. And so would you guys still be warm enough to be growing some warm season grasses in September and October? Or
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. That's the neat thing. We expect to have about 70% of our annual forage production, regardless by the middle of July. But if you get a year like this and you happen to get tropical storm, or you get a really good rainfall here this time of year, we can grow quite a bit of forage in August, September, and then when the temperatures drop below and it's really the nighttime temperatures. When the nighttime temperatures drop down into the mid 60s, then the forage really begins to slow down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess just kind of asking all those questions to kind of just paint the picture and contrast it with who I imagine quite a few of my listeners are from the West, and so they're experiencing something totally different than that, where we're, especially up here in the North, where we're almost exactly the opposite of you, probably growing 70% of our forage by the middle of June, and it's all cool season grasses. We've got our big four here, green needle, western wheat, needle and thread, and then probably, some others depending on where you're at. But it's all cool season grasses here. But similarly, we would depend on some September moisture for some regrowth, and that would be, again, cool season grasses that would regrow here in that September, October kind of range as well. So it's just kind of interesting the differences there and how those different countries react differently to the moisture that they receive. And I guess kind of where I was going with that was, so where you guys have missed out on a lot of this warm season grass growing moisture, is that grass, and maybe it's just the introduced species, which would be similar to here, that grass kind of rank, or however you want to say it, it grows a lot of forage, but it's not worth a lot. It's kind of washy grass that you guys were able to grow, given the fact that you had some moisture in May.
Well, if we get too much moisture, yes, it gets real washy. The forage quality is not very good. Since we only had that 1 month, and it's the prime month for it to really get kicked off, it actually was the only grass we were able to grow and graze. So it turned out to be really high quality forage for the time that we had it. It just, if we'd have been followed up with another month, just like we had in May, then it would have been a lot washier and it wouldn't have been near the quality. But this year, the forage quality has been really good for what you were able to grow. We just hadn't had any regrowth because the introduced pasture grasses typically don't have the deep root systems that what we call the big four native grasses do. Those native grasses are really ideal to draw up moisture when they can get it. And right now, you go out across our ranches, you can see the big blue stem and the Indian grass, and this had enough recovery. It's still trying to green up. Now, it may be slow, but it's trying to green up just because it has those deeper root systems. Now, because we'll see, we kind of cuss the drought, but if people that have managed through it really well, especially on those native grass areas, we can see them improve a condition score or half a condition score in their native range condition as they come out of it once they get the rains. Because if you've been managing grazing based off those tall grasses, they're going to respond immediately when you get the rain, and therefore they fill in some of those holes that some of those lesser quality grasses were filling in. So we're ready for the rain, and hopefully it'll improve a range condition a little bit if we manage the cattle right.
Do those big four hold their nutrients through the year better than the introduced? Yeah, same here.
Yeah, they just hold it a whole lot better. They're not going to hit the extremes that you might get with regularly fertilized Bermuda grass, but we're not fertilizing it anymore. So now you've got a grass that's just what I'd call a lower to a mid successional type plant that just fills the hole until something else can grow in there. Yep. And it can be really good quality for seasons of the year, but typically you get to this time of year, it's not very palatable and it's not very preferred.
Right. And that's the introduced that aren't palatable and preferred.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. The native grasses, if you got big blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, except for those reproductive stems sticking up, they're selecting for it right now.
Yep. And I would imagine that you're maybe too soon into this journey to kind of have seen some of those succession processes take place, where maybe some of these traditionally Bermuda grass pastures have made the transition to some more natives coming back in. But maybe you're in a high enough rainfall environment that you can see those things happen faster than we do up here. But
interesting enough, we haven't seen a lot of transition, but since we've made this change. You get along the edges of some of where the trees are and some of the boundaries, and all of a sudden we've had the managers call up and say, "Hey, Hugh, what's this grass? You go there, it's one of those native grasses that how in the heck did it get here? But yeah, you're seeing little spots where an individual plant will pop up. They're seeing a lot more of the lower successional native plants come in and begin to fill in some of those areas. It's been really interesting to see what that looks like. Things that I wasn't really expecting to see, but in such a short time, I figured it would be years. And then, of course, we've got a lot of annuals that come in. During the wintertime, a lot of even where the introduced pastures are, you've got a lot of annuals the annual bromes, annual ryegrass, that will occupy space early in the spring, which adds a lot of additional forage quality. And if we graze it right, then it helps with the fertility. But behind it, then you see some of these other natives begin to show up. They're not the predominant forage out there yet, but it's been a surprise to us how quickly in some of those areas that we are seeing some of these grasses show up.
Yeah, and what are some of the things that you are looking forward to in that regard? Some of the things that you guys are hoping to see, or maybe some of the things you're excited about the opportunity to see happen going forward.
Well, we always hear about that. There's a seed bank of native grasses out there that if we give it enough time, we manage it right, get our soil health in proper shape, they ought to begin to show up. So let's see what that really looks like, and then we look at the average age of a rancher or a farmer in the United States. It's 58 years old. Well, I just passed that, so I'm sitting there going, time is money. So are there indicators out there that if we were wanting to make those transitions, that if you could cost effectively apply seed to some of these areas, can you get that type of response that you're looking for? Those are some of the things that as a research institute, we'd like to, do some additional studies. But first, I think what we've got to look for is, are we seeing the native plants that should be here in our context appear? And if they begin to appear, maybe then would be an opportunity, or at least on a very small scale, see what it would take in order to help get more of the native grasses to not only occur, but also thrive in some of those environments, because we know those deeper rooted plants, you get a time like this, they're going to be a lot more valuable throughout, through the course of the year.
Yeah, very good. Well, what's the future hold as far as the Regenerating the Ranch series? The first one was context, talking about context. What is the future hold for this series, and what are you looking forward to?
Well, it's been really exciting for us to see what's going to come out of that. We were hoping to be able to introduce what regenerative ranching is to Noble and some of the excitement that's been generated around here. The next one's beginning to look at the applications on the ranch. What does the ranch life actually look like? It's easy for one of us that are sitting up here in the desk to talk about it, but the guys that are living it throughout the day, what does their daily life look like? And so you'll enjoy the next video in the series, where you're starting at daybreak and going out and following some of the guys through their thoughts throughout the day. And then the next one will be looking at some of the changes in our livestock, our small ruminants, how that's come about, and what has that meant to our operations. Beginning to show the story from the ranchers, our ranchers side, as opposed to having one of us that do more of these talks here being the one telling the entire story. It's not our story. Eventually, as a regenerative rancher, we want the ranchers to be the hero. We want them to be able to tell the story. We're just here to help them to help them, guide them through the process the best we can to get the results that they're looking for. And again, it's about healthy soils and profitability. And if we can help producers achieve that, then we're going to be achieving our goal.
Yeah, very good. And are there static herds at each of these ranches, or are you guys moving the same cows around to the different ranches? How's that?
Now, we have some static herds, but even within that, there's enough flexibility to where if we need to, we're not opposed to loading them all up and going to a different place. We've got a couple of properties that run our stocker cattle. Predominantly, they're just better suited for it. So when when the stocker cattle aren't there, we can always bring the cattle that may be the first to be sold. We'll bring them up to the property. So, but we do, we have 3 properties that have a larger cow herd that's on them, and then the other properties are used to kind of fill in the gaps.
Very good, Hugh. Appreciate your time today. I can throw some links in the show notes page if you have some you'd like to share now, but they'll be up there at workingcows.net/256.
Yeah, and the only thing that I'd add though, there, Clay, is that for producers that are interested in learning more, we do have a website, and www.noble.org. And if you would like to keep up with us, we have a weekly newsletter that comes out by email, and it's called the Noble Rancher. If you go onto our website, you can sign up for the Noble Rancher. You'll get a little weekly short articles that come out, and opportunity to keep abreast of what we're doing here at Noble, what's going on in our ranches, and eventually we'll have even more information available for producers, similar to what you're seeing with this little web series.
Very good. Very good. Appreciate it. Well, if you got 10 minutes after I let you go here for the broader audience, I'd like to ask you a little bit of bonus content questions about, you've been on quite the journey of leading organizational change, I would imagine. I'd like to ask you some questions about that if you got some time.
I've got time. Be glad to visit with you.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today.
You bet. Thank you. I've enjoyed it, and always enjoy these little podcasts. It's an opportunity for people to really get not only a variety of individuals and their thoughts, but also some of the what I call in my world, the leaders and their opinions and thoughts. So I appreciate you doing this. I know it takes a lot of time, but it's well worth it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's been a great opportunity for me to learn too, and it's just been an honor to let other people listen in on me satisfying my curiosity. So thank you.
Since 1922, Mystic Lubricants has been providing superior performance and protection for farmers who demand the most out of their equipment. Today, Mystic continues to develop products in real-world conditions that are specially formulated to meet the unique demands of your specialized machines. They provide advanced protection for engine longevity and are the choice of people who make a living working the land. Learn more about Mystic products at mysticlubes.com. That's MYSTIK lubes.com.
Really appreciate that. Really appreciate Hugh and his perspective and what he had to share there, and look forward to future conversations with him. Very excited to share with you next week my conversation with Ray Marxer. Ray was the manager of the Beaverhead Ranch, 240,000 acre property owned by the Koch brothers, and he is the author of the new book, Cowboy in a Corporate World. And I will read to you my review of his book, so that you can get a taste of it, and you can go out and actually pick up a copy of it if you want and read it before the interview. But it's a great conversation with Ray, so look forward to sharing that with you. But here is my review of his book. This is a fantastic book. It reads like a manual on so many essential skills for thriving in not just ranching and business, but also life. Skills like how to lead change in a large-scale business, how to advance within a corporate structure, how to make decisions in a complex system. But most importantly, this book will teach you about the essential role of faith in creating true success in all these endeavors. It does this without being heavy-handed, rather through telling stories and giving real-world documented examples on everything from cow and horse selection and ecosystem improvement to walking faithfully with family and God through life. I think this book will be on the back table of many future ranching classes, along with classics like Kick the Hay Habit, No Risk Ranching, Thoughts and Advice from an Old Cattleman, Dirt to Soil, Knowledge-Rich Ranching, and Chip Hines' works. All that is to say nothing of the fantastic photography from a large working Western ranch with beautiful landscapes, cowboys, cows, horses, and family. So look forward to sharing with you my conversation with Ray Marxer, the author of the book, Cowboy in a Corporate World. You can find that on Amazon, and we'll share links with that next week in the show notes page. But look forward to another episode coming your way real soon on the Working Cows Podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.